It's important to mention that although there are many aspects of Leninism that I don't agree with and find contradictory, I was a Leninist myself not long ago, and these are my main reasons for switching to anarchism originally. This will only be a criticism of the ideas he proposed in terms of revolution and whatnot, and not a criticism of him or his character, or his views on anarchism and left communism, although I and many others find his view on them rather infantile. In The State and Revolution, Lenin lays out his basic outline of how the revolution should be conducted to reach his theorized last stage of communism. At first, you have your standard revolutionary party, which outputs revolutionary papers. He also defines the roles of propagandists and agitators, propagandists being those who spread information or events happening on the country to get people well informed, and agitators being people who would, after the people are already somewhat informed, try and motivate the people themselves to act on them. He also laid out his ideas on how to make revolutionaries out of working class people, and the overall importance of professional revolutionaries, as in, they no longer keep their old professional jobs, but their entire day is dedicated to revolutionary activity. So far, I have no issues with these ideas. They're well thought out, generally applicable, and seem to work very well for the Bolsheviks, and does not yet differ from what would be possible to do under an anarchist model. My first issue, however, is this: his propositions of transition after the state had been smashed, or abolished. He claims that a new state must be built under the authority of the old revolutionaries, or vanguard party, which would take control over important industries and lead to a second and much slower revolution. One would slowly adapt the populace from capitalism to the last stage of communism, because it would wither away out of its uselessness, as society slowly changed to the changing economic policies conducted by the vanguard worker state. The main idea behind this is that humans are not ready to switch to communism after the destruction of the capitalist machine, because they've somehow mentally adapted to capitalism and can't escape it, because of how deeply etched it's been into our nature due to the necessities of our economic situation over time. But, in creating an alienated vanguard state put in charge of this revolution, giving them control over industries, therefore private property, and that with that wage labor, now in the form of labor vouchers, and the control of surplus value, you inevitably create a situation in which the economic situation of the new state, which is supposedly to lead a revolution out of capitalism, is nearly the same position as the old bourgeois, thus the origin of state capitalism. Wouldn't it be in the best interest of the new state to use its new economic position to its own advantage? Don't the habits and nature of people change their economic situation? The common argument against this may be, but it can be set up that the people can take out of office anyone who they think acts against their own interest, thus making it nearly impossible to exploit them. But how would they know exactly what would be against their interests if you claim the revolution must be done under the management of the most educated party, which knows best of the interests of the people, more than the people themselves, which was the main reason for creating said state, which would otherwise be unnecessary? Not only that, but how would the people all be completely aware of every action which is done by the state body? In short, in putting the economic and political interests of individuals at a position of power over the general people, you inevitably create class struggle. To take an excerpt from Mikhail Bakunin's God and the State, the privileged man, whether politically or economically, is a man deprived of mind and heart. That is a social law which knows no exception, and it is applicable to entire nations as to classes, corporations, and individuals. It is the law of equality, the supreme condition of liberty and humanity. The principal object of this treatise is precisely to demonstrate the truth in all the manifestations of human life. A scientific body, to which has been confided the government of society, would soon end up by devoting itself no longer to science at all, but quite another affair, and that affair, as in the case of all established powers, would be its own eternal perpetuation by rendering the society confided to its care ever more stupid and consequently more in need of its governance. Thus I see the idea of a workers' state as a harmful idea which would only crush the revolution at its very conception. My second issue is his assumption that people's actions and social customs under economic situations gain an almost permanent nature to individuals, and if people were to want to achieve a stateless and classless society, it would need to be extremely gradual. It's true that habits are a very powerful force in their day-to-day lives, and it's no help from our social media and other things which influence them when trying to escape it, but habits can be changed when faced with necessity. It's no question that people in general have adapted to capitalism in a way which they don't understand their actual situation, such as the prisoners in Plato's cave. But that doesn't mean that society must be slowly rehabilitated as if they've lost a permanent part of themselves and can only get it back through slow conditioning. If the current economic system of capitalism and the institution of private property and other forms of authority imposed were to be destroyed by the Revolutionary Party, to which then the Revolutionary Party would attempt to form workers' councils and other free associating organizations, I'd argue that it wouldn't take long for people at large to assess their situations and act accordingly due to the changing environment, because out of a changing environment comes changing necessities and new needs. Upon the disappearance of our super-mega consumer market and industry, people would have to face their own realities and work within their own communities to supply for their own needs as a whole, whether they understood it as being communistic or not. Money would also become useless, being that there is no state authority in banks. Thus people would have to revert to simply exchanging products due to the needs of their own communities. The older members of the Revolutionary Party could also form defense councils out of locally elected representatives connected with various voluntary militias, much like the free associating militias during the American Revolution. I can see, however, the criticism that a lot of society would still be within their submissive ideology, like a lot of the French after the Revolution, which just replaced the monarchy with the newly growing bourgeois class. But that only points to how important it is for the Revolutionary Party to educate workers as much as possible so that they can, on their own, achieve independence. But I digress. The thought that our behavior and psyche would take so long to change compared to our needs and situations seems more like an assumption than an observed fact. Besides, if our nature and habits are really so permanent and need multiple generations to change our form of economics, then it would seem that revolution would be impossible anyway, and Lenin's proposals are utterly improbable. To conclude, if you're going to have a revolution with the aims of liberating the working class of any country or any oppressive economic system, it must be done from the ground up. And at no point should any authority, no matter how much they've read Marx or like the color red, be put in the position of which their material conditions are benefited off the backs of the workers themselves, and that the worldview of Leninism is overall a very narrow one, and does not itself recognize many other forms of class dominance or understand many of the dangers of its own process.